All right, there we go. Hangout on Air is live. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining in. Have a bunch of people on the Hangout this month. Good to see. We love people showing up live, too. That's really nice.
Yeah, you said we love people, but I'm glad you continued the sentence.
How to qualify it.
Right,
How to qualify it. So this month, we have Nate Walk joining us, who, God, you've been around the MacAdmin space as long as I can remember. How long you been doing?
Well, so I have to go check IRC because that's like the golden standard there for how long I've been involved in macOS.
IRC, well, there you go.
macOS server channel. I think it's been like 7 years now, maybe longer. Every time I look, it's longer than I remember. But yeah, I've been around, you know, and help out wherever I can.
Okay, cool. And do you can you give us a rundown of your history? Where do we know you from in the MacAdmin community?
So I started at a university, Liberty University down in Virginia, and I was there for about I think it's 8 years or 8 years professionally, something like that. Is ye old story. Went to university, got a job working there, and then worked my way up through help desk and pulling cable and all that stuff up through sysadmin work. And then from there I went to, and that's actually where I got involved in open source, because if anybody's worked at a university, you know they hate one thing more than anything else, and that's generally spending money. So generally so I looked at open source tools for that reason, and that's how I found Monkey, and got involved in the Monkey project, and basically gave Greg Greg Nagel grief a lot, and got a really good schooling though, because there's a lot of really good people that are generous with their time, and helped me learn quite a bit. And I don't think I'd be where I am today without that. And then I went from there to Bank of America. I was there for about a year. I applied to Dropbox on a whim. Got it. Did not expect to. And then I was there for about a year and a half. I went as a MacAdmin. I got into more SRE style stuff. I was running DHCP and DNS for the entire corp side of the company. Totally burned out after about 18 months of doing that. Wasn't really what I wanted to be focused on. So I joined Facebook, and I knew Facebook from hanging out with Dodge, Mike Dodge, and some other folks that were in the community doing talks. And I was there for about 3.5 years. It would have been 4 years this May. And then this past September, I joined Uber, and I've been working on building a CPE team at Uber, and building the next, vNext of whatever it is that we is good for the company, here, and trying to figure out what works for us, what doesn't work for us, and merging everything in, because what works at Dropbox doesn't work at Facebook, and that doesn't work elsewhere. So it's always a challenge to figure out what works in this context.
Yeah, and we had a little chat yesterday about being remote. So you're remote. We could probably do an entire talk on being a remote employee, but how's that working out for you with your role?
It's challenging on some sides. I think like the social, personal side is the hardest, just because my entire career, my friends have been my coworkers more or less. And then when you don't have that, it's like, whew, I wasn't expecting that. You weren't expecting to just all of a sudden have have all that support gone. The social support, even outside of like technical topics. But I found a good co-working space locally, and I go there, and I have a lot of good friends there now. So that's helped. I've had to be an adult. I had to figure out how to be an adult all over again, essentially. How to balance those relationships and that time together. But it's been good. I think. I had to figure out how.
Oops, sorry.
I'm sorry, getting some feedback there. Yeah. I think being really strong with remote communications helps a lot. So like just saying stuff in chat, even if it feels like beating a dead horse, I'll just say, oh, I'm working on this, that, and the other thing. That way anybody who reads it on the team knows where I'm at and what I'm working on. And if I get stuck, I make sure I mention it. Because you miss a lot of context like that when you're not sitting next to someone. Like I can't just yell at Eric and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" Or, "Hey, I'm stuck on this. Can you help me?" It's a lot. You have to be a lot more intentional with his interactions. Virtual drive-bys, as it were, are a little bit harder.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I guess the thing I'm really interested to hear about is, playing on what you said about, what works at one place doesn't work at another place, and so on. So what's working at Uber? How's that going with MacAdmin? What are your tactics? And I know a little bit from speaking with Eric, who's also at Uber. It sounds like you've really doubled down on MDM as management and getting into Apple's MDM philosophy. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Sure thing. So on the MDM side of it, so I admit I'm still a little bit weak on this. Eric is, kind of like Eric and Danielle are both my AirWatch masters. But when it comes down to it, yeah, provisioning is all done via MDM. So you go through the dep enrollment, it pushes down install applications, it bootstraps Chef, and then we go from there. But one of the key differences for us is we're trying not to get tied to any one vendor's agent. And that's an intentional decision because when you're at this scale, it's really difficult if you use their agent, it might box you into a corner. You might say, I really need this feature, and then you can't just go make it because you don't have the full source. You can't just go make whatever you need. So on that side of things, we're trying to avoid that edge case and that pitfall. We're trying to make sure that whatever we do is cross-platform. So front of mind is Mac OS, Windows, and Linux. Obviously, Linux doesn't have MDM yet, or whatever. Who knows? So Chrome OS does though. So who knows? So we're trying to keep that in mind, and then also the methods we use for managing clients, we're trying to keep those in mind as well, and make sure that whatever we do, we can set the setting once and have it take across all the machines. So if we set like screensaver timeout, I should set that in one place as the default for the entire fleet. I shouldn't have to go Control F screensaver or grep F screensaver on the whole code base just to figure out where it is. So a lot of that are considerations that we're taking. MDM at the moment is kind of just like our bootstrapping. It's replaced imaging, right? It's now bootstrapping. It's no longer Deploy Studio. It's now AirWatch, Workspace ONE, whatever you want to use. So that's how we're using MDM at the moment. Now that said, we are looking towards the future, and in the future, we would love to be able to say, okay, let's validate that this client is who they say they are, and let them manipulate things on the MDM, but only for that client. So if we detect a bad state, we can still trigger an MDM action because we know it's in a bad state because we have agents client-side that can tell us this. And this is not something that MDM does today, and it's a huge gap in my opinion. There's no way to say, unless it's in this state, trigger the action. There's no way to do that. You have to, that's all bring your own adventure. So you have to write all that stuff. So that's something we're working towards. We want to be in a situation where we can say, it might be Workspace ONE today, it might be some other MDM, who knows what we'll be using in 2, 3, 4 years. But whatever it is, we want to be able to have it abstracted out to the point where we can, instead of having UDP management, we want to have actual management, something that's provable. But on the MDM side, that's kind of where our thoughts are and what we're looking at. We're not, and to be clear, we're not there yet. It'll take some time. But we're still working through some tech debt and standardization and a lot of the things that you need to do before you can worry about nice things like that. Do we have good data on the clients? Do we have known good management state? Do we have a minimal amount of failures with our management agents? So that's what we're working towards today, and then what I mentioned is what we're doing future.
Cool. So I like the way you put that UDP management, and yeah, it's kind of what MDM falls into. Just like, hey, go set this thing, and then you never really hear about it. So yeah, I think we're going to be at the point where we need our own agents on machines for probably a good bit. If you can say, I'd love to hear about the size and makeup of the fleet that you're managing. So you mentioned Chromebooks, you mentioned Linux. how many machines total, and what's the breakdown, if you can say?
So I'm trying to think if we publish this number publicly or not. So I'll just say low tens of thousands. I think that's safe. So low tens of thousands. In fact, it was really amusing because when I left Facebook, I was like, oh, I'm going from this really big fleet. It'll be a smaller fleet. Everything will be. And then I got there. I was like, oh wait, this is not a small fleet. You know, it was way more than I was expecting. But yeah, it's low tens of thousands, including our Windows boxes. Now we have a fair amount of Windows boxes right now. And Mac is about probably 2x whatever the Windows are, a little bit more.
Okay, that's cool. And one of the other topics that always comes up is security. So I guess as a slightly different take on it, I'm curious about, and again, as much as you can say, I'm curious about the security culture at Uber. Not so much specifically like what are you doing to secure it, but is there a security education program? Do teams take security seriously? Like that sort of thing.
I'd say the answer is yes on the prod side, absolutely. And we're starting to ingrain that on the IT side. And the IT side, they do, you know, we do the normal things, you know, red team, all this stuff, fix the gaps, and we're all working towards that. You know, it's always a little bit rough because I feel like in every corp org I've ever been in, it's always different than production, and it's not you know worse. It's just different. Because in production, there's a lot of considerations that you have to think about that you just don't have to think about in corp. And until you've made that transition or worked on both sides, you don't have, you know, the context for those types of, you know, that thought process. And once you do have that context, it's kind of natural, and everything you build, you have that in mind. But yeah, no, the corp side on the corp security side, we're definitely building out, and we are definitely working on improving things on that side. So yeah, if there's anybody that does corpsec, I'll put a plug in there. We're definitely looking for some security folks. And if you want to work with our CP team, we're totally open and looking for people.
Very cool. Good plug. Yeah, I guess I can actually plug a project that I started last year, kind of around that. I was contacted by someone who knew me, I don't know, 12, 14 years ago when I was consulting, and he found me and contacted me and was like, hey, are you still consulting? We have this big Mac fleet and it's not secure and blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, I'm not really consulting. And he was looking for some resources. And I said, I'll email you some resources. And I was like, hey, wait, I set up a whole website around this, MacAdmin.info. And that sort of bundles all this together, like how you get involved in the community and some resources that point you to, reading up on security and things like that. So it was nice to kind of already have that all bundled together. But for people that don't know about it, always looking for new resources for the Apple community. It's hosted on GitHub, so send in a pull request, and I'm happy to get it in as part of the site. But yeah,
looks great. Just pulled it up. That's I did not know about it, so that's fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that's like this chicken and egg problem. Like for people that are sort of thrown into the MacAdmin space, like how do you find out about the community and expanding your resources? And we don't know about them, so we can't necessarily reach out to them either. So hopefully they do a Google search and stumble across some of these things. But yeah, spread resources like that around. And after I came up with that, I found out there were some other lists. I know Charles Edge has one, which I point to from that site. But it was another reminder after spending some time with this guy on the phone that, yeah, not everyone takes security culture seriously, or even if the IT department takes security seriously, they're not in a position of authority to override people. So his complaint was sort of like, well, I'm the only one who takes care of it, and he's not a C-level executive, and the developers say that all the security stuff slows them down too much. I was like, well, you need someone on the executive side that can tell people, like, look, here's the mandate, and there's got to be this certain baseline of security, and for anything else we can have a conversation around it. And
just have someone run some numbers on how much cleaning up after breach or security incident would cost.
Yeah.
And see if that outweighs the 1%.
Yeah. Totally agreed. Totally agreed with that. And he, not only him, but there are a lot of people that I speak with that haven't really heard of the Beyond Corp philosophy, zero trust networking. So this was like, talking to him about that as a philosophy was just like, completely eye-opening to him. And in terms of like, oh, never thought of it like that. A lot of people are still very much in this entrenched, like, everything's on our local area network and we have this perimeter security, and, like assigning trust based on a decision, looking at the posture of an endpoint. It's like really novel to people. Even, Google's published papers on it. And, I'm at Duo Security now. Duo has a product. Okta, who I know people at Duo would be annoyed at me for mentioning Okta because they want to kill us, but Okta now has a product. There are more and more companies sort of productizing that concept. But as I get around to conferences and talk to different people directly, so many people really have not heard of that as a philosophy. So I guess it's a good question. Are you doing something in that space at Uber?
Yeah, absolutely. I think after hearing a bunch of the talks at various conferences, I definitely got sold on the idea. And yeah, it's absolutely something we're working towards. And going back to what you're saying about having a security mindset, I always feel like it starts with the individual. I'm having a security mindset. My goal is to make things as good as I possibly can, and I think that's a good place to start, especially for people on the client management side, because when it comes down to it, a lot of security folks are really good at malware and like all this other stuff, a skill set I don't have and I never will have. Expecting them to be like experts at systems engineering or systems work is a lot of times unrealistic. So I need to be that for them and help with his decisions and give my input, using the knowledge I do have. And I think a lot of times people are scared because they're like, oh, these security people, they're these gods up on this mountain, and you don't question the gods. But at the end of the day, I think having the discussion and being honest and upfront about what you'd like to do and where you want to go, I think that's really important for everything, but especially security side. But to answer your question, yeah, a lot of the stuff that we do already is Beyond Corp, but it's not 100% solid yet. It's really tricky if you have an AD infrastructure and you're coming from that. Unless you want to pay the big bucks to Azure, it's really difficult to do that. And running AD in a DMZ probably gives people ulcers. So I don't think that's that might not be fun either. So yeah, we're doing bits and pieces at a time, and we're smart about how we're consuming our external resources, and making sure that we're doing it in the most secure way possible. With the tooling that we have. Obviously in the future everything will be magical client certs, and they can only access things that client cert has access to, and but that's like unicorns and rainbows, unless you're maybe Google or some of these other companies. But yeah, that's what we're working towards. And I think that should always be the end goal. Minimum necessary access for a given client, and no more. So no access to other clients' data, no access to triggering actions for other clients. None of that. Just a minimum viable security access.
Yeah, nice. I going back to what you were saying previously, like I completely agree that security has to be a partnership, and that's not to say that departments can't give some sort of healthy pushback or explain why. I mean, I think we all know that if security had their way, right, we'd just leave all these machines closed and we'd never use them and we'd be perfectly secure, and that would be great. But people have valid concerns about usability, but yeah, there needs to be a conversation. Security needs to be sort of like present and interact with teams and just sort of not, give decrees from up on high, so to speak. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. It really needs to be a partnership between teams. So while we have you here, anything else that you care to speak about? Like, are you doing something clever that, like, to let people know that we're doing this cool thing?
So I'm really hesitant to talk about things until it's like done and in production shard 100. So I think we've talked about we had a blog post a week or two ago now, I guess it is. We also did a meetup. The meetup will be on YouTube here soon, so you can watch that as well. But that covers a lot of what we've been doing. It's pretty cool. But future stuff, I'm definitely going to be talking about it once it's done. But no, I don't want to tip my hand too much yet. But yeah, I think the biggest thing we're working on right now is we're building out more Chef API cookbooks and trying to expand that side of it, and trying to contribute more back, in the ways of config management on that side.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, you're right. I forgot to mention that. Like, Uber Engineering definitely has a very cool blog, and Uber has released a lot of cool open source projects. So, everyone should go check that out. I feel like we're living in a time of such prosperity. There's so much amazing open source work out there that, like, I think back to, like, when I started in the computer field. If I had access to that much information and good examples and sort of like free systems, like that, it's mind-blowing how much we have access to now. Like, really just great resources. And as you mentioned, Nate, right up front, I think probably for a lot of us here, open source was like a big piece of our career and sort of helped get us to where we are. And I did the same thing. Even I wasn't at a university, but I was just at a sort of very cash-strapped company who didn't want to give the IT department any as little of that pie as they could. And it's like, all right, well, Linux is this thing, and I'll just go set up Linux boxes as routers and DNS servers and all sorts of things. So yeah, I think that's been a huge part of most of our careers. Before we let you go, anyone have any questions for Nate? Oh, there we go. Victor, go.
Nate, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you guys do user management on the Mac. Do you do like a local user, or are you binding to AD? Are you managing the user with MDM, like pushing any profiles to a user level, supposed to the system, like anything like that?
Good question.
Yeah, so this is something that's interesting. It's a little bit in the weeds, but I'll go there quickly. So yes, so what we're doing is we're using the standard dep flow, and it authenticates against AD, makes sure that whatever the account password is and username matches the AD. So that's a huge help. So with the new provisioning, yes, everything's synced up, but it is a local account. It's not an AD mobile. It's nothing like that. But the machines are bound to AD at some point at the moment. I'd like to get rid of that, but we're not there yet. So that's to answer that piece. And as far as user profiles, we are pushing user profiles using AirWatch, and we're doing some interesting stuff on the Chef side. We basically look at all the profiles installed and all the user profiles installed, and we can actually scope other configs, services, and packages based upon whether a profile is installed or not. So, for instance, the use case here is we're deploying this software that has a Kext. Well, we don't want to deploy that software unless they already have the profile to whitelist that Kext. So we will look for that profile to be installed, and if it's not installed, we'll skip the install. And then the second they get it, the next Chef run, they get the software, and it's all good to go, and there's none of that hassle that you run into. And we do this. We're going to start doing the same thing with like user profiles, but we're not 100% there yet on the user side. There's like a lot of cool things you can do with user profiles. It's just a whole different thing.
Cool. Anyone else on the Hangout even? All right, Nate, thank you very, very much. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us, and yeah, telling us a little bit about another slice of the MacAdmin pie. I guess one pie. Are you also managing iOS devices? Since as that comes out of my mouth and I say MacAdmin, are you also responsible for iOS and Android, possibly mobile devices?
So on my team, we have several different sections. One of them is mobility, and they do cover the iOS devices. They're using because of the way iOS is, you do get all the functionality that you would normally have without installing an agent for obvious reasons. So yeah, they're using a lot of that. There is some scripted stuff that's done, I believe, but that's stuff that we're also going to be looking at building out. So like with that system I was talking about where you could like trigger things for a given Mac, you might also want to trigger things for a given user as well. Like for instance, you're sending a wipe. If someone has lost their backpack with everything in it, you want to wipe all their devices without having to click through them all. So maybe you can just send a destroy this user sort of command where it locks it all down, wipes all their devices, and then you can do it on both sides. We do use different tenants for iOS versus Mac, so we do split them via ABM. But yeah, that's that side of that. I haven't done a whole lot on that side, but we are looking at how we can. It's just like cross-platform, right? iOS is just yet another platform. We want to make sure that our tooling works across everything, and we don't repeat ourselves too many times.
Okay. Yeah. Very cool. All right. There's no other questions. Thanks very much, Nate.
Yeah, no problem. It was great.
Yeah. You're obviously welcome to stay and hang out.
I definitely will.
Cool. So one of the things we were chatting in the room about just before we got started was Apple had a new announcement around what's coming in 10.14.5, is it? And Victor, I think you had some better views on that than I do, certainly. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how that's going to affect Mac admins.
Yeah, so during WWDC last year, Apple announced this interesting new security feature called notarization, where you can upload an application or a package or really any file to Apple, and they will do some static analysis on it and give you back a new signature and say that we've notarized this app. And, it kind of just lingered there, like it was interesting. And then last night, out of nowhere, the notes for all the developer accounts and the betas were like, starting with 10.14.5, which is in beta right now. Applications will not run unless they are notarized, and so will any updated kernel extensions. And it was kind of interesting because the message was very clear and cryptic at the same time. Like it would say, "will not run," and it said, "For any developers new to distributing apps." And it was kind of unclear what that meant, because is it the certificate? It's like, is it requesting a new certificate, or is it creating a new developer account and then you get a different type of certificate? Like it was very unclear, and in many ways it still is. But a lot of smart people started digging into that right away. And so what we know as of now is if you have a kernel, for kernel extensions specifically, there's a cutoff date of March 11. So if you've signed something before March 11, that version of that kernel extension will keep running if you install it on 10.14.5. If it's after March 11, you're going to get this message saying this doesn't have enough, whatever. And you'll get a message and it'll link the team ID and say, contact these people for support, and it just absolutely won't run. So that was interesting to see, because we're already doing approvals for kernel extensions that we started doing earlier this year. But turns out, if you do have the approval for that code signature, the notarization doesn't really affect you. And then
you mean the kernel signing certificate?
So if you're pushing a whitelist via MDM,
Oh,
kernel
right,
extension
right.
whitelisting. That will
Overriding
also,
the user approved.
yeah.
So if you are managing via MDM and you whitelist a kernel extension, that will override the need for notarization?
Yeah.
Okay.
At least that might be a bug, but that's the current.
That's the current.
That's the
stage.
current status.
I have to look. I
and
might even be
then
running the beta.
The message says the applications won't run. What Apple means there is you won't see, like, Gatekeeper won't allow them. You can still run applications on Mac for now,
Yeah, yeah.
even if they're not signed or notarized, whatever, but you have to go through the normal method. So for admins, the impact seems to be very minimal because we're pushing all the software through Monkey or Jamf or MDM, and that doesn't flow through Gatekeeper. And then for kernel extensions, you're already doing waitlisting. Otherwise, your users are in the world of hurt. So it does seem to be a developer-focused
But it seems like there are a few edge cases possibly that'll catch admins, but probably not the larger shops that, as you mentioned, probably have Jamf or MDM or Monkey.
Yeah. I would say if you are relying on a security tool like Carbon Black or CrowdStrike or any of those, make sure you ask them.
Yeah.
And say, will your next version be notarized? Because
yes,
it'll bite you one way or the other sooner or later.
Yeah, yeah. That's the real question. Make sure if you have a vendor that has a kernel extension, ask them.
Yeah.
Anyway, Nate, you had a question.
Yeah, so I was curious, if you're an admin, can you option click it to open direct without any warnings, just like you could with previous apps?
It seems to be that way for now.
So it's similar mechanism. And then the other question I had was, like with the kernel extensions, where if you had kernel extensions installed prior to upgrading, is there a list of apps and app versions that get whitelisted even after updating so that it doesn't break existing
Somebody
apps?
was mentioning that Apple ships a long, very, very long plist in the OS with specifically with kernel extension names and versions. So it's like, it seems like they've whitelisted everything they possibly know about. But if you release a new version of that, then the new version will be verified with the rules.
Cool.
Gotcha. It makes sense.
And this seems to be standard Apple moves in the last couple of years, where here's MDM, and then people in the bigger companies or talk to your sales engineers, and they say you should really use MDM. It'll be more important eventually. And then we go, okay, sure, whatever. It doesn't give us anything. And then they say, with little warning, here's a massive change that requires MDM.
Yeah.
And this seems to be a similar thing. We're like, here's notarization. And then I remember a few months ago, our sales engineers were people like, you should
Pay attention.
pay attention to the notarization thing. It's going to be important soon. And then, oh, here you go, bam, with a relatively short notice. So, anytime, anyway, it's just having dealt with Apple for so many years, it's so annoying to have to read the tea leaves all the time. It's exhausting.
Well, I guess the thing that Apple gets dinged for all the time from business people is like, why don't we get a roadmap? Why don't we get a roadmap? Microsoft gives us a roadmap. But if you ever look at Microsoft's roadmap, they announce, it's like at least half of it disappears by the time things actually ship. So that roadmap is incredibly like idealistic, and it's not necessarily what comes to pass. But yes, maybe you can call it reading the tea leaves, but Apple's roadmap is WDC.
Sure.
Anything that gets announced at WDC, you should take pretty seriously.
Right, but yeah, they could still
changes
tell us more a little sooner than in release notes for
10.14.5.
Yeah.
That's not WWDC.
No, no, but notarization is announced. It's a thing you know about.
They could have said at WWDC, this is what this is what's going to happen with Gatekeeper and notarization in this next year.
Sure.
Like, if they won't even talk about something they're clearly planning to do 6 months out.
Yeah.
For no reason.
The one thing that I'll say to their benefit this time around is that it seems like software you already have is going to keep working.
Right.
which is slightly different from previous experience
Yeah.
with these kind of things.
So what you're saying is install literally everything before we update everyone's machine.
Everything that was signed before March 11th.
Good plan, Nate. That sounds reasonable.
Ship it.
Bigger hard drives.
Cool. So yeah, Mac admins, pay attention. And rounding out, we always like talking about conferences. One just happened. And Clay, you attended it. MacAduck. Yes, that one.
Yeah, it's good. It was in London. Brexit didn't happen, so everyone was able to leave. So that was all. That was all good. It was a good conference. Yeah, it was good to see the group. I've been there three years.
So this is one of the Mac admin conferences that I have not yet attended. So remind me and everyone else, it's a single track conference?
Yeah. No, they're multiple tracks.
Okay, 2 days?
2 days.
2 days.
Yeah.
With two.
And then usually there's a workshop. We have 2 tracks. It's
Two
with
tracks.
a few joint sessions.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Any standouts? Anything?
Yeah, there were a few good sessions. David Ackland did an interesting talk of sort of about cryptography. Basically, let's do some very simple math to show you how public key cryptography works, that
Nice.
sort of thing, which is stuff I think people knew or in theory, but it's good to say, here's a very small set of prime numbers and you can factor them, you can see how the math works. And then what the computers do is they take these really big ones and it's much more complicated. Really
Awesome.
Figure it out. That was interesting. What do I call him? Detective? They say someone else.
Forensic.
No, in the Metropolitan Police Department, is it detective sergeant? Something like that. Anyway, he was there. Maybe did something. Anyway, he was the head of or high up in the cybercrime division for the London Metropolitan Police Department. And he had an interesting sort of free-flowing Q&A talk about things they're facing and what they're dealing with and that sort of thing. It was pretty interesting.
Oh, that sounds cool.
Yeah, obviously, like, someone asked, well, so what would you like? It's like, obviously, I would like to have easy access to all of this data, but I also clearly understand that, like, a backdoor wouldn't work because that's a huge risk to have exposed for people. So, he was very balanced with you. He wasn't like, I demand access to people's phones. It's
good to hear.
I would love to have access to people's phones, but let's, work out some way.
Well, they have your
figure that
face
out.
on every video camera in London anyway, so like the phone access feels almost secondary.
If you get enough angles from the CCTV cameras, you can just 3D model someone's face and go, oh, look.
Yeah, they kind of know where you are at all times anyway in London.
Yeah, that was good. And another gentleman from Mac Stadium talked about a new virtualization scheme, I guess I would call it, that they're playing around with like QEMU and running Mac OS inside of Docker, and it's fascinating and horrifying and interesting. He said it was in their initial testing, it was much faster than they would have ever expected anything like this to ever happen. Like, perhaps even in some cases, it felt in some tests faster than like straight Mac OS install. So something was going sideways on that, but it was still interesting because it gave them a lot of flexibility for using the tools around Docker and things like that. So it was a good conference.
Cool. Do you know if MacAduck posts videos?
They do.
They do. Okay. I was going to ask.
I've never actually looked for them or seen them, but they did record most of the sessions.
Okay. Well, some of those sound really interesting, so I'd like to check them out.
Yeah, I don't know if the cybercrime talk was recorded or not. I don't remember. But I think everything else was. Okay.
Not necessarily in order, but maybe, because I always forget one or two. I made a quick list. So MacAduck just happened. We got Mac DevOps. I don't know if that's the very next one, but Mac DevOps is coming up.
Just before that is Mac Deploy.
Yeah, I always forget that one. I would
just before that.
Yeah, like a week before.
So
right?
WWDC, Mac Deploy, Mac DevOps. So you can just have a solid 2 weeks of Mackie goodness.
I'd like to get to Mac Deploy. Sounds good. And
Calgary.
Yeah, and Anthony Reamer, who runs it, lovely guy, has spoken at Mac Tech conference in the past.
Yeah, I've never been to Mac either. Mac DevOps, I really like. I don't know if
Yeah.
sure, so
It's a good event.
that's a great conference.
Penn State, I think they have their call for papers still open. So if you're looking to speak at a conference, there's one. X-World in Sydney, Australia, they also have their call for papers opened up. And one that we don't usually mention, but it's getting more and more interesting because it's right at the intersection of security and the Mac world, is Objective by the Sea. And that's run by Patrick Wardle, and he ran one at the end of 2018 in Hawaii. And now there's one coming up in
Monte Carlo.
Monte Carlo, right?
I'm pretty sure.
Yes, I think you're right, in France, south of France. And I mean, the locations, yeah, of course, they're amazing locations and they sound great. But honestly, the content is like, the first round was really good. The talks that he's announced this time seem really, really good. And our Mac community friend Sam Keeley seems to be speaking there this go round with a really interesting talk on what on your Mac system will let you elevate to root, like whether you want to allow it or not. It sounds like an interesting talk and perfect for Objective by the Sea. So that's a conference that seems like it leans more towards the security world, but as Mac people, it has the right content. So I think it's one we're going to be paying attention to more and more. Mac Sysadmin in Gothenburg, Sweden in October, and MacTech in October, which I kind of rounds out the year. I guess I could mention Jamf Nation, if like that's a very specific part of Mac administration. Either that's a useful conference to you or it isn't. Like there's no middle ground on that. Either you use a Jamf product or you don't. I've never attended because I've never really used a Jamf product, but that's in November, I think, as far as I understand. So yeah, some
November in Minneapolis, fantastic.
Yeah,
it's just not January, I guess.
Yeah, I guess Jamf has a largish portion of the education market, would be my guess. And over the summer, when it's probably nicer in Minneapolis, like that's the hell month for people in education, because that's when they get to kind of revamp the network and reimage machines and get new machines in. So that might be what drives their decision not to do it over the summer.
Okay, for Penn State, they usually get a really good showing of education folks.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And they started off education only, so they understand that that workflow. So I mean, just glancing down at this list, it's like, again, speaking of like bountiful times, there was definitely a time where we didn't have this level of support in the community. So really nice to see. Like you can't attend them all, but you know, take your pick, take your whichever one like vibes with you the most, and show up and tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started thinking about conferences, there was the developer track in WWDC, or the
they actually had
admin track.
They had an IT track.
IT track,
teeny little bit
for a couple of years, and
Macworld.
There was Macworld.
That was it.
Twice a year.
That was it. And there were some developer conferences around, and then Mac Enterprise started doing these like the weekend before WDC meetups, because they knew there would be all these MacAdmin types around, and then Apple asked them to stop because that was Apple back in the day. Like, you're taking away from our spotlight, so don't do that. But again, you know, they've gotten a lot better. They're sending people out to either attend or speak at these conferences. I know PSU has a ton of Apple people speaking at the event this year. You know, they still don't get to be recorded and those types of things, but you can still go to these events and, you know, meet up with an Apple person. And if you're lucky enough in the lottery, you still get to go to WDC. I haven't bothered in ages, but I know people who are going.
0 for 6 on the team, 0 for 7. I don't know people.
So anyway, any questions from anyone on the Hangout? We'd love to answer your questions. Otherwise, I will say this really slow to give people opportunity.
Where's that microphone button? Click it.
All right, everybody. Thanks for another month, and we will see you next month. Thanks.
Thank you.